Hi everyone, welcome back to 1% Crime. I know you're here because you can't sleep, and tonight, I've got a chilling story to keep you company. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? And if you enjoy content like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, let's get into the story. The trial, December 1st, 2022. The Mendoza Criminal Court stood still, holding its breath. Inside, tension was thick, the air electric with anticipation. Crowds gathered in and around the courtroom, waiting for the verdict that could change everything. In the defendant's seat sat a 32-year-old woman, dressed in a sleek black dress with white beads around her neck. Her face was unreadable, calm, collected ease, burning with quiet defiance. She was about to hear the decision that would not only seal her fate, but also mark a turning point in Mendoza's history. Everyone knew her, and yet, in this moment, she was a stranger. Outside, the judge's footsteps echoed through the halls, sounding like a heartbeat. The truth long buried in silence was finally on trial. The backstory: this all began in Manado, a picturesque town nestled in the valleys of Argentina's Mendoza province. In autumn, Manado transforms, streets lined with golden leaves, mountain peaks glowing orange and red. Everyone here knows each other. They share joys, grieve losses together, and celebrate life side by side. And it was here that Rolando, Angel, Eno met Karen. Obviatha, romance that would soon shake not just this quiet town, but the entire nation. Rolando had a magnetic presence. Karen, she was fire. They met by chance, but quickly became inseparable. In 2016, they moved in together and opened a small shop in the front room of their home. Karen painted the signage by hand. It was their little dream, and the people of Manado respected them deeply. But Rolando remained a mystery. He was Bolivian, and very little was known about his past. By contrast, Karen had grown up in Manado. Locals had seen her blossom from a spirited child to an ambitious woman. Rolando juggled their shop and a job at the wholesale fruit fair in Guayamalin. Together, they looked like the perfect couple, resilient, entrepreneurial, and deeply in love. Cracks in the surface. Then came the first crack. One day, Rolando discovered Karen in a car with another man. In a rage, he nearly tore the vehicle apart. But despite his heartbreak, he chose forgiveness. He stayed. From the outside, they still looked like the perfect couple. But inside, the storm had begun. Who was Rolando? Born in Bolivia in 1987, Rolando was the oldest of 7 children. He valued family, worked hard, and wanted a household filled with joy and children's laughter. He had 2 sons from previous relationships, one with Carolina Chavez, another with Soledad Guardia. Though those relationships didn't last, Rolando remained a present and loving father. He played football, kept fit, and was described by all who knew him as kind and dedicated, though reserved. Karen's past. Karen, born March 30th, 1990, had her own share of history. Before Rolando, she had 2 daughters from past relationships. In 2013, she married Raul Oviedo, father of one of her daughters. But over time, that relationship deteriorated, partly due to financial strain. One day, Raul left on the pretense of buying something, then vanished. He crossed the border and never returned. A child's death. In summer 2019, Rolando's young son Elias came to stay with him and Karen. But on the morning of July 12th, Rolando noticed the boy wasn't feeling well. He rushed him to the children's hospital. Elias had seemed perfectly healthy just hours earlier, but now he was in critical condition. Despite doctors' efforts, Elias died shortly after arriving. The cause: 3rd-degree poisoning that led to multiple organ failure and cerebral thrombosis. The medical report stunned everyone. Karen suggested cremation, but Elias's biological mother refused. She wanted to bury him and visit his grave. Rolando was shattered. But through it all, Karen supported him tenderly. Over time, her care helped him heal. A suspicious pattern. 16 months after Rolando proposed, they married. Rolando believed he had found a partner who would stand by him forever. But just 2 years later, tragedy struck again. On February 6, 2022, Karen came home from the salon and gym to find Rolando sick, vomiting violently. By the next morning, an ambulance was at their home. Rolando collapsed and was rushed to the Santa Maria clinic. He died on February 9th. The investigation, Rolando's sudden death, shocked everyone. He was a healthy 35-year-old, active and athletic. Karen told doctors he had been taking medication for skin discoloration. That raised eyebrows. Tests revealed something alarming. Extremely high levels of calcium oxalate crystals, a clear indicator of ethylene glycol poisoning. That's antifreeze. Suspicion deepened. Neighbors reported that Karen often gave Rolando mystery medicine when she wanted to attend parties alone. Some even questioned Ilias's sudden death in 2019. Was it possible she hadn't meant to kill Rolando, but merely sedate him? That theory was quickly dismissed. The evidence told a different story. Karen, under interrogation, investigators questioned Karen about the substance she gave Rolando. She insisted it was a harmless skin treatment, but when asked to produce the vial, she claimed the housekeeper had thrown it away. When authorities questioned the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, she denied this completely, and the contradictions kept piling up. To be continued. The truth, it seemed, was dripping out like poison, slow, deliberate, and deadly. What really happened in the quiet mountain town of Monadoo, and was Karen hiding even more than anyone imagined? We'll uncover more in the next episode of 1% Crime. Until then, lock your doors, trust your instincts, and try to sleep. If you can. Continuation of the story. The trial of Karen Oviedotha trial continued to unfold like a slow-burning tragedy. One key moment came when the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, made a chilling statement. Not only did she deny throwing away any medication bottle, as Karen claimed, she also recalled overhearing a tense conversation between Karen and Rolando. In it, Rolando had voiced frustration and suspicion about the treatment he was being given. Karen was arrested during the investigation. Her phone was seized and examined. The results shocked everyone. Family, friends, and even casual acquaintances were stunned by the sudden loss of Rolando. Visitors to their small warehouse couldn't wrap their heads around what had happened. How could a man who had seemed so full of life just vanished? Even Karen's ex-husband Raul was in disbelief. He insisted that Karen had never shown any violent tendencies toward him. But then came the most damning discovery of all. Digital EVID and CI investigators discovered that Karen had used a search engine to look up most deadly poisons, how to delete search history, but it didn't stop there. They found 2 separate online orders for ethylene glycol, the deadly, sweet-tasting chemical found in antifreeze. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention confirmed it. Ethylene glycol is a synthetic, odorless substance that can be fatal in small doses. Armed with this information and the forensic results, the Mendoza prosecutor's office charged Karen with intentional poisoning. They alleged that she diluted the ethylene glycol in orange juice, a fatal cocktail that led to Rolando's slow and agonizing death. But Rolando wasn't the only one. A second victim. As the investigation deepened, authorities reopened the case of Elias, Rolando's 9-year-old son, who had died in 2019 under mysterious circumstances. At the time, his cause of death had been listed as organ failure and cerebral thrombosis. But investigators found something haunting. Karen had purchased ethylene glycol on July 2, 2019, just days before Elias arrived at their home. Elias's mother, Soldat, confirmed that Karen had even insisted on cremating the boy's body. She refused. This evidence led to a second charge of aggravated murder filed on March 4, 2023, this time in connection with the death of young Elias. Courtroom DRA Mon, March 14th. A judge ordered Karen into pretrial detention. She appealed, but the judge denied it, declaring she was to remain behind bars until the trial. 10 months later, on November 28, 2022, the trial of Karen Oviedo officially began. The courtroom was packed. The media dubbed her the Guatemala poisoner. 2 indictments were on the table. One, led by prosecutor Fernando Guzzo, focused on Elias's death. The other, by Claudia Rios, addressed Rolando's murder. Rolando's eldest son, 15-year-old Javier Eno, stood as a plaintiff in the case. Prosecutor Guzzo argued that Karen had murdered both father and son using the same methylethylene glycol mixed into orange juice. The defense strikes BAC Cacaren's legal team pushed back hard. They claimed that Rolando had been abusive and that Karen had been a victim, not a killer. They argued that there was no clear motive, especially for the death of a child like Elias, who posed no threat. Her lawyer pointed out that the property, the house, the cars, and the business, they all belonged to Karen. If anything, she stood to lose, not gain. They also questioned the credibility of the tech evidence. Was there definitive proof that Karen herself had made those poison purchases? Maybe her account had been hacked. Karen claimed she wasn't even home on February 6th. When Rolando began showing symptoms, she insisted she was innocent. Witness TSTMON, when it was her turn to speak, Karen maintained her innocence. She declared that being accused of killing the man she loved, and her own stepson, was devastating. Then came a string of powerful testimonies. Soledad, Elias's mother, told the court that Rolando had once confided in her that Karen suggested cremating Elias, so both families see. Karen Oviedo was sentenced to life in prison. A woman once seen as a loving mother and business owner was now one of Argentina's most notorious poisoners. And the question that still lingers: why? She had a home, a partner, a family. Was it jealousy? Control? Pride? No one may ever truly understand what twisted desires led Karen to destroy the very people who trusted her most. And now, behind prison walls, she will spend the rest of her life pondering the darkness that consumed her. Hand stole 2 lives. A new mystery. The man in the WATR jail at 28th, 1996. A calm summer morning in South England, Captain John Copic and his son set out on their small fishing boat off the coast of Brixham, Devon. They had hoped for a good catch. Instead, they found a nightmare. After hours of empty nets, they sailed farther out, into a stretch of water ominously known as the Roughs. There, they dropped their net and waited. Soon, they felt a heavy pull. Expecting a haul of fish, they reeled it in only to discover a human body tangled in the mesh, bloated, decomposed, clearly dead for some time. Captain Copic immediately radioed the Brixham Coast Guard. The body was recovered and transported to the coroner in Devon. He was a middle-aged man, estimated between 40 and 50. His pockets were turned inside out. No ID. Only 2 identifying clues remained. A faded tattoo on his right hand and a Rolex Oyster perpetual watch still ticking on his wrist. The tattoo appeared to be a cluster of stars. The Rolex, immaculate. The medical examiner determined the cause of death: drowning. The head showed some trauma, likely from being dragged along the seabed, but nothing fatal. His lungs were full of water. Police speculated he might have fallen overboard during a ferry crossing. A tragic accident. But something didn't add up. And it all started with that Rolex watch. The Rolex leads. The Rolex Oyster is a waterproof watch. It runs for 48 hours after the last motion. This particular watch had a date feature. It was still working, and the date on the watch, July 22nd, 1996. Investigators determined the man likely died on July 20th, just days before he was pulled from the sea. Then they checked the watch's serial number, hidden between the wristband and face. That number was sent to Rolex. Weeks later, They had a name, Ronald Joseph Platt. Dental records confirmed it. Ronald Platt had been a quiet, introverted man, born in Calgary, Canada, in 1945. Later moving to the UK, he had no wife, no children, and worked as a TV repairman, a veteran of the British Army, a man who kept to himself. He loved Canada, and the maple leaf tattoo on his hand was proof that Rolex. He'd bought it in Germany in 1967. It was one of his most prized possessions. His ex-girlfriend said he never even took it off, not to sleep, not to shower. But how did a quiet man like Platt end up in the English Channel? Detective Constable Ian Kynan of the Devon and Cornwall Police was determined to find out. Unraveling a ghost's life, the investigators traced Ronald's last known address hundreds of miles away. In Essex, Detective Sergeant Peter Redman of the Essex Police agreed to help. When he arrived at the listed residence, the place was vacant. The landlord told him the tenant had moved, but left behind a reference letter. That letter mentioned a man named David Davis, Ronald's supposed friend. Redman contacted Davis and requested a meeting. When they met, Davis was calm, confident, even friendly. But something felt off. When asked about Ronald, Davis claimed he hadn't seen him in over 3 months. He said he had loaned Ronald money to start a business in France, and believed he was living there now. No alarm, no emotion. He even identified Ronald's maple leaf tattoo, confirming the man's Canadian pride. Davis didn't seem the least bit shocked that his friend had been pulled from the ocean. The Essex Police closed their case. Everything Davis said matched the accidental drowning theory. But back in Devon, Detective Kynan wasn't convinced, and when he couldn't get in touch with Davis again, his gut told him something wasn't right. Redman agreed to help one last time. He drove out to Davis's current addresser, remote area in Woodham Walter, a rural village with only 4 houses, none of them numbered. To be continued. Who was David Davis? Why did he lie about Ronald's whereabouts? And how did a solitary man with a Rolex and a dream of Canada end up as the John Doe in the net? In the next episode of 1% Crime, we follow the trail of lies, stolen identities, and a plan so cold and calculated could only end in murder. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and sleep if you can. The man with many unamesta houses had no numbers, just names. Detective Sergeant Redman approached the first door in the small village of Woodham Walter. An elderly couple answered. When Redman asked for David Davis, they hesitated for a moment before correcting him. No, that's not his name, they said. But they were clearly referring to the same man Redman had already met. Something was off, and Redman knew it. He called Detective Cleanahan back in Devon. The pieces were falling into place, and a new chapter in this twisted story was beginning to unfold. Now, detectives from 2 counties were on alert, both convinced that this case was far deeper than they first imagined. A family that wasn't IS neighbors recalled seeing Platt in the area, but with a young woman and 2 children. They assumed this was his wife and kids. The family had often visited Devon, apparently to enjoy their time on a yacht moored there. But when pressed, no one could remember the yacht's name. A small detail, but one that would soon matter. Cleanahan re-interviewed old witnesses, starting with the fisherman who found Platt's body, Captain John Kopic. Kopic mentioned a second item he had tried to sell from that fateful day, the anchor. By sheer luck, the anchor hadn't sold. Cleanahan retrieved it as potential evidence. Next, Cleanahan reached out to Platt's brother, Brian, and that led them to Elaine Boyce. The charmer named David Lane had met Ronald Platt while working as a receptionist at a fine arts auction house in Harrogate, England. She also remembered David Davis, the man who changed everything. He was tall, charismatic, magnetic. Davis talked about relocating to Yorkshire and quickly befriended both Elaine and Platt. Soon, He offered them jobs, executive positions at his company, the Cavendish Corporation, to Elaine and Ronald. Davis was generous, sophisticated, successful. He spun tales of lawsuits and alimony battles with an ex-wife in New York, who, he claimed, was trying to drain him financially. He said the company roles were temporary, just until things settled. Elaine and Ronald were enchanted by the illusion. They traveled through Europe, brokering Davis's deals, moving money into various offshore accounts, never questioning a thing. Why would they? To them, Davis was a devout man of faith, reliable, loyal, untouchable, a gift, and a trap on Christmas Day 1992. Davis invited them to celebrate with him and his daughter, Noelle. The evening was festive, joyful. Then Davis presented them with a gift: 2 tickets to Canada, a dream come true for Platt, whose lifelong wish had been to return to his homeland. There was just one catch: they needed to leave before February 1993. The short notice raised concerns for Elaine, but Ronald was thrilled. Before they left, Davis asked for something seemingly harmless: rubber stamp replicas of their signatures, their driver's licenses, just in case any documents needed signing or ID was needed while they were gone. They didn't think twice. They trusted him. And so, in February 1993, Elaine and Ronald boarded a flight to Canada, never realizing they had just handed over the keys to their identities. Life in Canada, and the great disappearing ACT Canada, wasn't what they had expected. They landed in the dead of winter. Work was scarce. Bills piled up. The couple's relationship began to crumble under the pressure. 5 months later, Elaine flew back to England for her sister's wedding. She had no intention of returning, but Davis was there, too invited as a family friend. He approached Elaine, asking after Ronald. When she told him she and Platt had separated, Davis's demeanor changed. He first tried to convince her to return to Canada, then abruptly backed off. He soon vanished again, leaving Elaine with only a mobile number. That, too, went silent. Her ties to Ronald and Davis were now severed, so when Davis called her out of the blue in 1996, the conversation was brief, forgettable. He said nothing about Ronald, never mentioned that Ronald was dead. Suspenseful. When detectives told Elaine that Ronald's body had been discovered, her reaction changed. Now, she was suspicious. And for good reason. Elaine's testimony became the missing link between Ronald Platt and the man who had stolen his life. But police still needed hard evidence. Witnesses came forward. They recalled seeing Davis with a pregnant woman, sometimes introduced as Elaine Boyes, other times as Noelle Platt. He also claimed to be Ronald Platt, and yes, he owned a yacht. One witness remembered seeing Davis and the real Ronald Platt together, just a month before the body was found. They'd even stayed at a hotel under the names David and Ronald Platt. Now it was clear, Davis had not only assumed Platt's identity, he had likely murdered him to keep it. Then came the final clue: the phone calls and the STNG mobile. Phone records showed that calls were made from Davis's number in the same region of the ocean where the medical examiner believed Ronald had drowned. That was it. Essex police planned a sting. Elaine Boyes agreed to meet Davis for coffee at Chelmsford train station, but Davis caught wind of the setup. He never showed. Redman, however, wasn't giving up. He circled Davis's home and saw movement inside. Rather than rush in, he called for backup. There were concerns Davis might be armed. Soon, a taxi pulled into the driveway. Davis jumped in. The chase was on. Police followed, and when the taxi was finally stopped, they moved in with weapons drawn. Davis surrendered quietly. No struggle. But the real shock came later at fingerprinting the man behind. The MSK prints were sent through Interpol. The match came quickly. David Davis was really Albert Johnson Walker, one of Canada's most wanted fugitives, number 4 on Interpol's red list. The man who had assumed Ronald Platt's identity wasn't just a fraud. He was a serial con artist, a white-collar criminal, and no very likely a murderer. His trail began 6 years earlier, thousands of miles away. 2. Be continued. Who was Albert Johnson Walker? How did he climb from a small-town bank teller to one of the most dangerous financial criminals Canada has ever known? And what did he do to Ronald Platt when the man he impersonated finally came home? In the next episode of 1% Crime, we follow the chilling descent of Walker from family man to fugitive and murderer. Until then, stay aware and sleep if you can. Ronald Platt and Albert Johnson Walker. The Rolex corpse Ronald Platt was a quiet man with a small circle of friends and a lifelong dream of settling in Canada. But that dream would be twisted into a nightmare by a man hiding behind a stolen identity. Albert Johnson Walker. Walker, who was posing as David Davis, saw in Platt the perfect opportunity. Platt's obsession with Canada made him a prime candidate for identity theft, and Walker exploited this to the fullest. But in 1995, Platt threw a wrench into Walker's scheme. Life in Canada hadn't lived up to his expectations, and Platt informed Walker that he planned to return to Essex right into the same area where Walker had been living under Platt's name. Walker's carefully fabricated double life was on the verge of unraveling to Ronald Platt's in the same town. That was a risk Walker couldn't take, so he made a chilling decision. He invited Platt for a weekend getaway to Devon to celebrate the launch of his newly purchased yacht, the Lady Jane. The two men set sail just friends on a casual fishing trip. Out at sea, far from prying eyes, Walker struck. He smashed Platt over the head with an anchor, tied it to his waist, and threw him into the ocean. A quiet, calculated execution. But Walker made one fatal mistake. He forgot to remove Platt's prized Rolex. That watch, ticking away even underwater, would become the unraveling thread of an otherwise perfect crime. Its serial number lead investigators straight to Platt's identity. Forensics matched the head injury to the anchor. Zinc traces on Platt's pants matched the anchor's composition, and hair and fingerprints found on the Lady Jane linked the crime scene directly to Walker. His daughter Sheena and former friend Elaine Boyes delivered devastating testimony. Sheena, who had been forced to live under her father's control and false identity as Noel Davis, revealed Walker's disturbing manipulation and lies. In court, Walker maintained his innocence, blaming Platt's death on an accident, but the jury saw through it. In 1998, Albert Johnson Walker, Canada's fourth most wanted fugitive, was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Ronald Platt. Years later, his parole was denied. Today, he remains behind bars. A man who nearly got away with the perfect crime, foiled only by the ticking of a Rolex and the weight of karma. Lisa Cecilia Hardam and Simon Jitney. The apartment prison controlling behavior in romantic relationships can often go unnoticed until it's too late. That was the tragic reality for Lisa Cecilia Hardam, a vibrant, kind-hearted woman whose love life spiraled into a nightmare. Born on June 12, 1981, in the suburbs of Toronto, Lisa was raised by a single mother alongside her older brother Jason. Athletic, graceful, and ambitious, Lisa dreamed of a life filled with beauty and art. She struggled with anorexia during her teenage years, but emerged stronger, eventually studying cosmetology and moving to Australia in 2005 to start a new life. In Sydney, Lisa quickly found success landing a job in a beauty salon, making new friends, and dating. But her life took a dark turn when she met Simon Jitney. Simon was everything Lisa thought she wanted: wealthy, mature, confident. But what Lisa didn't know was that beneath the polished exterior was a man with a violent criminal past. Simon had a long history of aggression, theft, and drug offenses, and had served multiple prison sentences. After relocating to Sydney, he reinvented himself as a successful businessman, concealing his past behind a luxurious lifestyle. Their relationship started casually. Simon offered Lisa a room in his upscale apartment when she was looking for a new place. At first, it seemed like a generous gesture, but soon, Lisa was drawn into a web of manipulation and control. The apartment became her prison. Simon installed 24-hour surveillance, monitored her every move, isolated her from friends and family, and began exhibiting obsessive, jealous behavior. His charm quickly gave way to intimidation and psychological abuse. Lisa's once bright spirit dimmed under the weight of his control. 2. The outside world. Simon projected the image of a caring partner, but behind closed doors, he created a nightmare Lisa couldn't escape from. When she finally began to resist, to take back her freedom, it was too late. Lisa Cecilia Hart, tragic death, shocked Australia. Her story became an international scandal, exposing how a man could disguise abuse as devotion and transform luxury into captivity. Simon tried to spin the narrative, to make Lisa seem mentally unstable, to suggest suicide, to cast doubt, but he underestimated the strength of her family, the resolve of investigators, and the clarity of the truth. Justice caught up to Simon Jitney. He was arrested, charged, and ultimately convicted, not just for murder, but for systematically destroying another human being's life. Lisa's story is a haunting reminder. Behind the facade of love can lurk unimaginable darkness. For the first few months, Lisa and Simon lived in separate rooms. There wasn't even a hint of romance or physical intimacy between them. But slowly, their bond deepened, a spark ignited, and their friendship evolved into a romantic relationship, one that quickly intensified. At the time, Simon was 37, and Lisa was 28. To her, he seemed like a dreamer, charming, generous man who spoiled her with gifts and delighted her with surprises. The two began appearing everywhere together, including the elite sports club Simon had attended for years. Lisa was convinced she had finally met her soulmate. She spoke of Simon to her mother, brother, and friends with starry-eyed admiration, never suspecting that this fairy tale would soon take a horrifying turn, from Prince Charming to possessive tyrant. Just 6 months into their relationship, Simon's behavior began to shift, but in subtle stages. Lisa didn't see the red flags. Instead, she believed everything Simon did was out of love and care. He began isolating her from her friends and family, gradually eroding her sense of self. He criticized her interests, manipulated her opinions, and rewrote her identity to fit his own needs. In June 2010, not long after Lisa's 29th birthday, Simon began pressuring her to quit her job. He told her she was underappreciated and deserved better, but Lisa loved her work. She had built strong relationships with her clients and took pride in her career. Her refusal to resign infuriated Simon. In August, he stormed into her cell, a humiliating scene. Overwhelmed, Lisa resigned on the spot. When she arrived in Canada, her family was stunned. The once vibrant, radiant Lisa was now unrecognizable. She wore no makeup, her long hair tied back and hidden under a scarf. She dressed in oversized black clothes and flinched every time the phone rang, always rushing to answer, no matter what. Her brother Jason and mother Joanna were alarmed. During a heart-to-heart conversation, Lisa finally broke down. She confessed that Simon tracked her every move, knew who she talked to and what she said, and had completely taken over her life. She wasn't allowed to work, go to the gym, or maintain friendships. "He always knows everything," she whispered, "but he says he loves me." Despite her family's desperate pleas to stay in Canada, Lisa insisted on returning to Australia. She believed things would get better. "It's just a phase," she told them. "He's not a bad person. He just wants what's best for me." But things didn't get better. They got worse. Trapped when she returned, Simon tightened his grip. Lisa was no longer allowed to leave the apartment at all. If they went out together, she had to look only at the ground. Simon began calling her by her middle name, Cecilia claiming it sounded more respectable. In early 2011, Lisa started complaining of pain in her leg, an old ballet injury. Instead of taking her to a doctor, Simon hired a female physiotherapist to treat her at home. Unknowingly, this therapist became Lisa's only real connection to the outside world, and her lifeline. On her 30th birthday, Simon threw a lavish party at one of Sydney's finest restaurants. But Lisa wasn't allowed to invite anyone. The guest list consisted only of Simon's relatives and close associates. That night, he proposed. Lisa accepted and cried. But those weren't tears of joy. They were tears of despair. Afterward, she called her mother, sobbing, and told her about the engagement. Joanna begged her to leave Simon, but Lisa only asked her never to bring up such topics on the phone, again hinting that Simon might be listening. A plan to escape despite everything. Lisa clung to the hope that their wedding might bring change, but when she tried to discuss the ceremony, Simon shut her down. He would pick the venue. He would make the guest list. Lisa would simply show up, feeling hopeless. She confided in the physiotherapist. Together, they came up with a plan. Every time the therapist visited, Lisa secretly handed her personal items, documents, clothing, and essentials to keep safe. It was a slow, careful build-up to a quiet escape. Then, on July 28th, Simon made a mistake. He left his laptop at home. In a rush, Lisa saw her chance. The illusion of love. The tragedy of Lisa Cecilia Hardham. For months, Lisa Cecilia Hardham had been living under the illusion of love. On the surface, her life looked picture-perfect luxury, comfort, a devoted fiancé, but beneath that polished exterior, she was a prisoner in her own home. Hidden surveillance cameras in every room, spyware installed on her phone and laptop. Social isolation and emotional control. Lisa was being suffocated, slowly and methodically, by the man she believed loved her. Lisa's discovery of Simon Jitney's spyware confirmed her deepest fears. Her every word, every move was being monitored. Surveillance footage, email logs, even recordings of her calls to her mother. It was all there. The final straw came on July 28th, when Simon, in his haste, left his laptop at home. Lisa seized the moment, unlocked the device, and found the chilling truth. Her home wasn't a sanctuary. It was a cage. She used her physical therapist's phone to call her mother in Canada, begging her to come immediately. But Joanna, unaware of the urgency, couldn't leave work that fast. She needed time she'd later regret not having. That same day, Simon realized Lisa had accessed his laptop. The confrontation was inevitable. Lisa, desperate, tried to understand why the man she loved was treating her like a possession. Simon, cold and composed, dismissed her tears. "It's for your own good," he said. The last morning, July 30th, 2011. Lisa woke early. She got dressed, gathered her documents and essentials, and locked herself in the bathroom. She called her mother one last time. Her voice trembled. If anything happened, she warned, Simon would be responsible. What happened next remains shrouded in uncertainty, but the aftermath was horrific. Neighbors later told police they heard a scream from the hallway, abruptly cut off. Seconds later, a woman's body plummeted from the 15th floor balcony. Lisa died instantly. A dog walker nearby said he saw a man on the balcony moments before the fall, holding something large, then tossing it. When onlookers gathered, Simon Jitney came running from the building in his pajamas. He wept, shouted that he couldn't live without Lisa, claimed she jumped. He told police she had suffered from mental health issues and had threatened suicide before. But evidence would soon prove otherwise. Evidence and the unraveling leap. Lisa's body was examined. Authorities found fragments of a torn note scattered throughout her pockets. The words were damning. There are cameras everywhere in the apartment. Investigators found dozens of surveillance devices, but the hard drives containing the footage were gone. Simon denied they ever existed, but what he couldn't erase was the communal hallway security footage. It showed Lisa fleeing the apartment, shouting for help, only for Simon to grab her from behind, cover her mouth, and drag her back inside. On his laptop, investigators found recordings of private conversations, proof of the spyware, and a chilling conversation between Lisa and Simon the night before her death. She had begged to leave. He calmly told her she never would. The trial, Simon was arrested and charged with Lisa's murder. During the trial, he appeared with his new girlfriend, 22-year-old model, Rachel Louise. Eerily similar to Lisa, she sat in the courtroom, defending Simon to the press. But testimony soon crushed any notion of his innocence. Lisa's physical therapist took the stand, recounting how Lisa had given her personal belongings in secret, preparing to escape. She spoke of Lisa's fear, the restrictions, the surveillance, and the pain. Simon's defense claimed Lisa had mental health issues, that she had jumped, and that he was too small to lift her. But a gym trainer testified otherwise. Simon was deceptively strong, capable of lifting heavy weights with ease. The most damning detail, no fingerprints were found on the balcony rail. Lisa couldn't have jumped without touching it. Simon Jitney was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 26 years in prison with a chance of parole after 18. As the verdict was read, Rachel Louise had a public meltdown and was escorted out of court. She soon broke up with Simon, though she continued to claim he was innocent. Lisa's mother, Joanna, would never forgive herself for not catching the first flight, but it wasn't her fault. Lisa tried to escape. She fought, but the monster behind the mask of love was faster. Next, episode preview. The Gay Slayers. We turn the page on Lisa Hardham's story. We descend even deeper into the psyche of another man, a man who didn't just kill, but turned murder into a resolution. Colin Ireland called it a goal. He wanted to become a serial killer, and in 1993, he set out to do just that. With chilling precision and a terrifying calm, he stalked and murdered 5 men from London's gay scene. But Ireland wasn't driven by passion or rage. He was driven by a calculated desire to be remembered. Stay with us as we explore the twisted tale of the man the media dubbed the Gay Slayer. As the world ushered in 1993 with fireworks and celebration, one man in London made a darker resolution, one that would haunt a community and define a twisted legacy. Colin Ireland vowed to become a serial killer. His targets, vulnerable gay men, and his mission, to etch his name into infamy, one brutal murder at a time. Who was this man? What transformed a seemingly ordinary drifter into one of Britain's most chilling serial killers? Hi, I'm James. Welcome to True Crime Case Files. In today's episode, we dive into the mind of Colin Ireland, the man who would become known as the Gay Slayer. This is a story of control, cruelty, and a deadly craving for recognition. Section 1. The making of a monster. Born in 1954 in Dartford, Kent, Colin Ireland's early life was marred by instability. Raised by a single mother, he never knew his father. Poverty and frequent moves defined his childhood, though he described his mother as affectionate. The revolving door of men in their lives bred a deep sense of insecurity in young Colin. A small, bullied boy, Ireland skipped school, failed to make friends, and grew into a withdrawn, detached teen. By adulthood, he was spiraling petty crimes, stints in Borstal and prison, and a string of failed relationships. He drifted from job to job, never settling, always searching. But beneath this chaos, a darker obsession was brewing. Ireland became fascinated with serial killers. He studied their methods with forensic precision, reading FBI manuals, watching crime shows, and learning how to avoid detection. He even took notes on geographic profiling, planning to kill far from home to avoid suspicion. Ireland began stalking his victims in London's vibrant gay scene, particularly at the Cohorn pub, a popular spot for the LGBTQ community. He learned the culture, blending in as a dominant partner in the S&M scene. identifying passive men who would let him tie them up. His first victim was Peter Walker, a 45-year-old choreographer. After meeting at the Cohorn, they returned to Walker's flat. There, Ireland handcuffed and suffocated him with a plastic bag. But the horror didn't end. There he burned pubic hair, placed teddy bears in grotesque positions, and left sickening messages. The scene was staged to mock, to dominate. Section 4. The trial and confession. The evidence was overwhelming. Spy notes, surveillance tapes, the testimony of gym trainers who said Ireland was deceptively strong, and chilling audio recordings. But it was Ireland's confession that stunned the court. With cold detachment, he described each murder in disturbing details, tripping away any remaining illusions about his motives. He didn't kill out of hatred. He killed for recognition. Ireland pled guilty to all 5 murders, ironically denying himself the prolonged trial and publicity he once craved. The judge called him exceptionally frightening, sentencing him to life imprisonment with no chance of release. To take 1 life is an outrage, the judge said. To take 5 is carnage. Section 5. Legacy of terror in prison. Ireland continued to unsettle those around him. Rumors swirled that he strangled a fellow inmate, a convicted child killer. He was transferred to a high-security unit and remained isolated. On February 21, 2012, Colin Ireland died in prison from pulmonary fibrosis and a fractured hip. He was 57. Former prison governor Vanessa Frake later described him as the most frightening inmate she ever encountered. He just emanated evil, she said. Epilogue. Reflections. Colin Ireland's legacy is one of cruelty, calculation, and manipulation. He was a man driven by a hunger for control and notoriety, someone who treated murder like a career move. But beyond his grotesque ambition lies a deeper, more painful truth. 5 innocent men lost their lives simply for being themselves, and an entire community was left traumatized. The Gay Slayer case ignited national conversations about hate crimes, societal bias, and the vulnerabilities of marginalized groups. Today, Ireland's actions are studied in criminology courses, not to glorify, but to understand the dark psychology behind such evil. Because understanding is the first step toward prevention. This has been True Crime Case Files. I'm James. Stay safe, stay curious, and never underestimate the darkness that can hide in plain sight. Psychological profile and trial of Colin Ireland. Forensic psychologists later theorized that Colin Ireland's choice of victims wasn't personal, it was strategic. He deliberately targeted gay men, not out of hatred, but because he perceived them as vulnerable, easy prey in a society where they were often marginalized. He once said, "If I was approached, it was likely I would kill. But if no one approached me, nothing would happen. I'd just go on my way." That chilling logic masked an even deeper detachment. Professor Michael Brooks, a forensic psychologist, explained. He reduced his risk of resistance by waiting to be approached, selecting only those who initiated contact. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Ireland's personality was his complete lack of remorse. His confessions were disturbingly emotionless. He described each killing with a clinical detachment, as if recounting someone else's actions. Detective Inspector Martin Finian put it this way: "It was like listening to someone describe a trip to the grocery store. I went in, I picked this, then I killed him. No compassion, no hatred, just facts." There is a long-standing theory in criminology that many who commit homophobic murders are themselves suppressing same-sex attraction. Was that the case with Ireland? He claimed he was heterosexual and never touched the men sexually. But can we really believe that at least 5 men, all of whom invited him to their homes undressed and allowed themselves to be restrained, did so without a single act of intimacy? Or was he hiding the truth not just from the world, but from himself? There's also the question of motive. Was Ireland seeking fame as a serial killer? He was known to have studied FBI profiling manuals and serial murder literature in detail. Or was his real motive more selfish, simple robbery, with murder committed to eliminate witnesses? His claim that he decided to become a serial killer purely to be remembered feels, in hindsight, like a performance. A lie layered over something more ordinary and more sinister. Was Colin Ireland manipulating society's latent homophobia to downplay his greed and violence? Or were all of these motivations tangled together? The truth may never be fully known. Call to action, podcast transition. What do you think? Was Ireland a cold-blooded fame seeker, a repressed killer, or just a calculating thief hiding behind a sensational story? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know what case you want me to dive into next. New case: the murder of Julie Kibuishi, 911 operator, Costa Mesa, 911. What's your emergency? Caller: there's a body in my son's apartment. 911. A body? Caller: yes, a dead body. There's been some sexual activity. She's dead. There's blood from her head. On the evening of May 21st, 2010, a young woman was discovered murdered inside the apartment of 26-year-old Army veteran Sam Hare. The discovery sent shockwaves through the quiet, affluent beachside community of Costa Mesa, California. The caller was Sam's father, Steve Hare. He and his wife had gone to check on their son, who hadn't shown up for a planned visit that weekend. When they entered his apartment, what they found was a scene of horror. A woman lying face down on the bed, partially undressed, with 2 gunshot wounds to her head. The bed was soaked in blood. Her sweater had the words "All Yours" scrawled on the back in marker. She wore a tiara. A knife was nearby, but unused. Her purse was found in the kitchen. From her ID, police identified her as 23-year-old Julie Kibuishi. Julie Kibuishi was born on Valentine's Day, 1987, to Japanese-American parents in Southern California. She was vibrant, artistic, and kind-hearted. Her friends described her as goofy and fun-loving, someone who always lifted others up. Julie attended the Orange County School of the Arts, then went on to study fashion design at Orange Coast College. That's where she met Sam Hare. Julie tutored Sam in anthropology. Their friendship was platonic, but it would cost Julie her life. Next segment, teaser. With Julie's body in Sam's apartment and Sam nowhere to be found, the police had just one question. Was he a fugitive, or had someone else set him up? Stay tuned for the next chapter in this twisted story, as we unravel the disturbing events behind one of California's most baffling murder cases. The setup: a killer's deception on May 21st, 2010. 26-year-old Army veteran Sam Hare had no idea. He was walking into a death trap set by someone he considered a friend. That morning, Daniel Wozniak, out Hovork community theater actor, just days away from his wedding, asked Sam to help him move some boxes at the Los Alamitos Joint Forces training base. Sam, trusting and loyal, agreed without hesitation, while Sam was bent over, organizing boxers in the attic. Wozniak raised a gun and shot him in the back of the head. Sam never saw it coming. Mortally wounded but still alive, he begged for help. But Wozniak, cold and calculated, shot him again, this time killing him. Why would someone do this to a friend? Wozniak had racked up enormous debt and needed money for his wedding and honeymoon. He knew Sam had savings from his military service money sitting untouched in his bank account. The only way to get it: eliminate Sam. But Wozniak's plan didn't stop there. He knew that if Sam simply disappeared, suspicion might arise. So he devised a twisted cover-up. He decided to use Sam's phone to lure someone else into the apartment, someone whose murder could be pinned on Sam, making it look like Sam was on the run after committing a heinous crime. That person was 23-year-old Julie Kibuishi. Julie was a kind-hearted young woman. a friend of Sam's and his former tutor. She had no idea the texts she received that day pleas for help weren't from Sam, but from the man who had just murdered him. Messages sent from Sam's phone begged her to come over, claiming he was in emotional distress. Julie, the kind of friend who never turned her back on someone in need, went to Sam's apartment. What happened next was horrifying. Julie was found the next day by Sam's father, shot twice in the head, partially undressed, with the words, "All yours," scrawled on her sweater in black ink. The scene was staged to look like a sexually motivated crime, and all signs pointed to Sam. His car and passport were missing, and text messages from his phone seemed to suggest he had lured Julie there. The Costa Mesa police were convinced they had a veteran on the run, possibly suffering from PTSD and responsible for a brutal murder. But Sam wasn't on the run, he was already dead. Segment title: The Break in the Case. Days later, strange withdrawals began appearing from Sam's bank account. Surveillance footage from an ATM revealed not Sam, but a teenage boy making the withdrawals. That teen was 17-year-old Wesley Freilich, who told investigators he was just doing a favor for a man he looked up to, Daniel Wozniak. Wesley explained that Wozniak had claimed to be a bail bondsman trying to collect money Sam owed. Investigators were stunned. This was the same Daniel Wozniak whose wedding invitation they had found in Sam's apartment. It was time to pay the groom-to-be a visit. On May 26th, just 2 days before his wedding, police showed up at Wozniak's bachelor party. Shocked and pale-faced, he was arrested and brought in for questioning. At first, Wozniak played it cool. He said Sam had confessed to killing Julie and fled. He admitted to helping Sam access his money before disappearing, but insisted he had nothing to do with the murders. When they brought up DNA evidence and potential charges, Wozniak began to panic. He started shifting his story. Finally, under pressure, he made a critical slip. He casually mentioned details about Julie's murder that hadn't been made public, including the fact that she'd been shot twice. That was the moment detectives knew he'd been there. In the end, Wozniak was sentenced to death. His fiancée, Rachel Buffett, was later charged with being an accessory after the fact and served prison time for her role in the cover dash Up. Sam. Hare and Julie Kibuishi were both bright young people with promising futures. Their lives were stolen not by a hardened career criminal, but by a man who wore a mask of charm and friendship, hiding a calculating heart beneath. Without a shred of hesitation, Daniel Wozniak pulled the trigger again. Sam Hare, an Army veteran, was already down pleading for help when Wozniak calmly reloaded his weapon and fired a second shot, killing Sam instantly. But the horror didn't end there. With disturbing composure, Wozniak picked up Sam's phone and began texting Julie Kibuishi, pretending to be him. In a twisted plan to lure Julie into the trap, he invited her to Sam's apartment under the pretense that Sam was emotionally distressed. Julie, ever the caring friend, agreed to come by. That same night, as Sam's lifeless body lay hidden in the attic of a theater, Daniel Wozniak laughing, singing, and performing in a like nothing had happened. After the curtain closed, he made his way to Sam's apartment. When Julie arrived, Wozniak led her inside, then executed her with 2 bullets to the head to mislead the investigation. He staged the crime scene to make it appear as though Sam had raped and murdered Julie before fleeing. But Wozniak wasn't finished. With cold precision, he returned to the attic, dismembered Sam's head and hands, and discarded them in a nearby park hall in an effort to delay identification of the body. The very next day, Wozniak returned to the stage as if nothing had happened. He was photographed, laughing at cast parties, seamlessly hiding the double homicide he had committed just hours before. So what was the motive? Money. Wozniak was drowning in debt, 2 months behind on rent, and unable to afford his lavish upcoming wedding or honeymoon. When he learned that Sam Hare had $62,000 saved from his military service, he saw an opportunity. 2 innocent lives were taken so that Wozniak could afford his dream honeymoon. The case against him was damning. Police found a backpack Wozniak had given to his brother, filled with incriminating evidence: Sam's bloody clothing, his passport, financial documents, and the murder weapon. Wozniak's DNA was all over everything. On December 16, 2015, after a swift 5-day trial, Daniel Wozniak was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. On January 11, 2016, after just an hour of jury deliberation, he was sentenced to death. The judge officially handed down the sentence on September 23, 2016. But the lies didn't stop with Wozniak. His fiancée, Rachel Buffett, had also been deceptive. Though she denied any involvement, she was later arrested and charged with 3 felony counts of accessory after the fact. In September 2018, she was convicted on 2 counts and sentenced to 32 months in prison. She was released in 2019. 2 promising lives, Sam Hare and Julie Kibuishi, were brutally cut short. All so a desperate man could pay for his wedding and vacation. If there's any consolation, it's that the man responsible is now spending his final days behind bars, where he can harm no one else. But this next case shocked an entire nation. This is the story of Monica Gurd, India's first renowned perfume expert, whose death sent ripples of fear across the country. It was the morning of October 6, 2016, in Sangolda, a serene village in Goa, known for its beaches and calm lifestyle. Monica Gurd lived alone in a 3-bedroom apartment in the upscale Sapana Raj Valley complex. That morning, her housemate arrived between 9 and 10 a.m. and rang the doorbell. No response. She tried again and again, calling out, knocking, but still nothing. Deeply concerned, the maid called Monica's brother, Anand, who lived in Mumbai. Anand repeatedly tried to reach his sister by phone. No answer. He then contacted Monica's next-door neighbor, who held a duplicate key to Monica's apartment. What they found inside was a scene of unspeakable horror. Monica was lying motionless on her bed. Her hands were tied behind her back, and the lower half of her body was unclothed. There were no signs of movement. The neighbor immediately called the police. When law enforcement and medical personnel arrived, they confirmed Monica had been murdered. Her body was sent for post-mortem examination. What stunned investigators even more was what they didn't find. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen. It didn't look like a robbery, it looked like something far more personal. The apartment was largely untouched. No signs of a struggle. There were eggshells in the kitchen sink, indicating someone had recently eaten. Police checked her purse and found nothing unusual, just receipts and bills. Unfortunately, the housing complex lacked CCTV cameras, and no one in the area reported seeing a suspicious person enter or leave Monica's flat. This was not a random attack. It appeared to be premeditated. Someone who knew Monica had likely done this. At the time, Monica had been living alone due to a separation from her husband. Police naturally turned their attention to him, first Bardhaman Ramu, but what they found didn't align with the evidence. He was ultimately ruled out, so who killed Monica Gurd, and why? Stay tuned as we unravel the rest of this disturbing case. The interrogation had barely begun when shocking new details started to emerge. Monica Gurd wasn't just any woman. She was the daughter of a retired judge from Mumbai, Ramesh Gurd. Monica had initially built a career as a photographer, but her passion eventually shifted to the art and science of fragrance. In a short span of time, she carved out a name for herself as India's first renowned independent perfume expert. She became quite popular not only in Goa, where she had recently relocated, but also among elite business circles across the country. She was often seen attending high-profile events and rubbing shoulders with top industrialists. So when news of her death broke, it sent shockwaves across the entire nation. For days, her murder dominated headlines and rolling news coverage. The entire country wanted to know who killed Monica Gurd. and why. Soon after, Monica's autopsy report was released. The cause of death was confirmed: suffocation. Even more disturbing, it was also revealed that she had been sexually assaulted before being murdered. The Goa police had explored every possible lead, yet they had no suspect, no clear motive, and no solid evidence. But then, a small detail, previously overlooked, opened the first real door in the case. Earlier, while searching Monica's purse, officers had found several debit card receipts, but no card itself. Acting on this, police contacted Monica's bank and requested the transaction history of the missing card. Breakthrough came quickly. On the morning of October 6, 2016, the very day of Monica's murder, the card had been used at an ATM in Porvorim, just 4 to 5 kilometers from her apartment in Sapanaraj Valley. The police asked the bank to alert them immediately if the card was used again, and they also obtained the ATM's CCTV footage. The image they saw on the screen was unmistakable. Captured in clear view was the face of a young man withdrawing cash. Raj Kumar Singh, a former security guard of Monica's apartment complex. He had been terminated just 2 months earlier after being caught stealing. Finally, investigators had a name and a face. They began digging into Raj Kumar's background and learned he was a 21-year-old from Binda, Punjab, with a history of theft charges. Now, the only question was, where was he hiding? Not long after, another withdrawal was flagged, this time from an ATM in Bengaluru, a city nearly 600 kilometers away. Goa police immediately alerted the Bengaluru authorities and shared Raj photo. Bengaluru police scanned footage from that ATM and confirmed the same young man was withdrawing money. They began canvassing hotels and lodges in the vicinity. At one hotel, a receptionist recognized the photo and confirmed Raj Kumar was staying there, but was currently out. Close officers positioned themselves around the hotel. When Raj returned, he had no idea the men standing outside were police. Without resistance, he was quietly taken into custody on October 8, 2016, just 2 days after Monica's murder. With a transit warrant secured, Raj Kumar was returned to Goa for questioning. Under intense interrogation, he finally broke down and confessed to the murder of Monica Gurd. Then, he told investigators the chilling story behind it. It all began months earlier. In June 2016, Monica had decided to move to Goa to expand her perfume research and was searching for a rental apartment. On June 7th, she arrived at Sapanaraj Valley to view a flat. The complex's management had already instructed the guard on duty Raj Kumar Singh to show her the unit that day. As Raj Kumar guided Monica through the apartment, something changed in him. He later told police he became infatuated with her, one-sided obsession that would soon turn dark. Over the next few days, he fantasized constantly about Monica, and then, just days later, he saw her returning to the society with her belongings. She had rented the very apartment he'd shown her. Ecstatic, Raj Kumar offered to help move her luggage. With the help of 2 others, he carried her belongings inside, giving him yet another opportunity to see her. But being a guard limited his access, and he wanted more, so he came up with a plan. He approached the society's manager and asked to take on additional work cleaning and maintaining the residence, cars, claiming he was in desperate need of extra income. The manager agreed. His real goal, to get closer to Monica. Holding a knife, he threatened Monica not to scream. She screamed anyway. He quickly covered her mouth with his hand, dragged her to the bathroom, and then forced her into the bedroom. There, he tied her hands behind the bed and bound her legs. He then demanded money. Terrified, Monica told him to take whatever was in her purse. He emptied it, around $4,000, roughly $48. It wasn't enough when he demanded more. She told him about her debit card. She gave him her PIN and explained step by step how to use the ATM. Monica likely hoped that once he had the money, He would leave on that the police could later trace him through the transaction. But Rajkumar wasn't done. Before leaving, he stuffed a cloth into her mouth to silence her and went into the kitchen. He boiled eggs, ate chocolates, drank water, even enjoyed some ice cream, relaxing, as if he were in his own home. 2 days without food had left him ravenous, and now he indulged himself, knowing no one would interrupt. By midnight, after satisfying his hunger, he returned to the bedroom. Taking Monica's phone, he forced her to unlock it. He then opened an adult website and made her watch 3 explicit videos, further terrorizing her. She was now fully aware that he had no intention of letting her go. He untied her legs and stripped her from the waist down. Then, he raped her. It was nearly 2 a.m. Rajkumar had been in Monica's apartment for 8 hours. Once he was done, fear began to creep in. He realized that Monica could identify him. She knew exactly who he was. If he left her alive, she would go to the police, and he would be punished. So he picked up a pillow. Without hesitation, he pressed it against her face until she stopped, moving. Monica Gurdindia's first renowned female perfumer. A daughter, a sister, a vibrant woman, was gone. After murdering her, Rajkumar calmly walked into the bathroom. He shaved his beard. He bathed. He erased as many traces as he could, preparing himself for a clean getaway. At 3:30 a.m., Rajkumar walked out of the apartment as if nothing had happened. On October 6, 2016, under the cover of darkness, Rajkumar quietly slipped out of Subrai Valley at 6 a.m. He used Monica Gurd's debit card to withdraw cash from an ATM and fled to Bangalore, completely unaware that police were closing in. His arrest shocked everyone. Once in custody, Rajkumar gave a full confession. He told police how he'd fallen for Monica when she first visited Subrai Valley in June to view the flat. After helping her move in, he became obsessed. To get closer to her, he asked the society manager to let him wash residents' cars. His real motive was just to interact with Monica more often. But everything changed when Monica's umbrella went missing from her car. She reported it, and during an inspection, the umbrella was found in Rajkumar's quarters, already on thin ice due to previous complaints. He was fired on July 22, 2016. His infatuation curdled into resentment and rage. Over the next few months, he drifted between cities Chennai, Mumbai, Pune, working odd jobs. But the anger lingered. On October 2nd, he returned to Goa with a sinister plan. He hid on the terrace of Monica's building for over 2 days without food or water, waiting for the right moment. On October 5th, Monica finally returned. Around 6:30 p.m., Rajkumar rang her bell, claiming to be a security supervisor. As soon as she opened the door, he forced his way in. Brandishing a knife, he overpowered her and bound her hands and legs. Then he demanded money. Terrified, Monica gave him her purse, which had only $4,000, about $48. Unsatisfied, Rajkumar demanded more. Monica told him she had a debit card and explained how to use it, including giving him her PIN. She likely hoped he'd leave and police could trace him, but instead, he gagged her, ransacked her kitchen, boiled eggs, ate ice cream, and made himself at home calm and methodical. Around midnight, he returned to the bedroom. Using her phone, he forced her to watch explicit videos. Then he assaulted her for the twisted fantasy he'd been harboring since their first meeting. By 2 a.m. After 8 horrifying hours inside Monica's home, he realized she could identify him. To silence her forever, he pressed a pillow over her face until she stopped breathing. Then he showered, shaved, and left, vanishing into the night. 2 days later, on October 8th, he was arrested in Bangalore thanks to ATM camera footage and the alert hotel staff. He had no idea the evidence trail was closing in. The Goa police returned with him under transit remand. A thorough investigation followed. On January 6, 2017, a 228-page charge sheet was filed, charging him with rape, murder, and robbery. The case is still under trial. This was the tragic and deeply disturbing case of Monica Gerd, a pioneering Indian perfume expert whose life was stolen by obsession, revenge, and brutality. Up next is the chilling saga of Michelle Williams, a woman whose entire life was woven with deception. From childhood, Michelle lived in a world of lies. Raised in Hurst, Texas, alongside her younger sister Laura, Michelle's father tried to raise them alone after their mother walked out. Struggling to make ends meet, he worked construction jobs and often scammed insurance companies by faking injuries. Michelle grew up watching this deceit. It became second nature to her. By 15, Michelle had already learned how to use her charm to manipulate men. At 17, she dropped out of school and told her boyfriend, Kenneth O'Brien, that she was pregnant. He married her and joined the army to support their growing family. But Michelle wanted more than military base housing and a modest life. After 5 years and 3 children, she left Kenneth claiming abuse, which later turned out to be a lie. Back in Hurst, she began a new relationship with her former classmate Brandon, but just before their wedding, Brandon discovered Michelle had never divorced Kenneth. She quickly arranged a legal split, and the couple married in 1994. At first, life was calm. Brandon built an IT business while Michelle worked as a dental assistant. But soon, strange behavior emerged. Michelle brought home dental supplies and large amounts of cash. Eventually, she was caught stealing from her job. Brandon installed hidden recorders and discovered numerous men visiting the house during the day. He also learned that Michelle had lied about her first marriage. Kenneth hadn't been abusive. She had been unfaithful. When Brandon filed for divorce, Michelle retaliated, cruelly destroying his saltwater aquarium and poisoning his beloved dog, Domino. She made sure Brandon suffered emotionally and financially. It was only the beginning. Later, it came to light that Michelle's first child wasn't Kenneth's at all. It was fathered by John Paul Ray, a high school acquaintance. Michelle had tricked Kenneth into marriage and 13 years of child support. After her divorce from Brandon, she moved in with John for 8 years, until he too discovered her infidelity. Michelle's next partner was Greg Williams, wealthy, generous, and unsuspecting. The couple had a daughter in 2007 and married the following year. It looked like Michelle finally had everything she wanted: money, a family, and security. But what happened next would show just how far she'd go when the dream life began to slip from her grasp. Greg and Michelle Williams lived in what looked like a picture-perfect home in Keller, Texas. It was a sprawling suburban house filled with children from previous relationships, backyard barbecues, and summer pool parties. On the surface, they were a modern, blended family, chasing the American dream. But beneath the surface, things were far from perfect. Both Greg and Michelle were gun owners. Michelle kept her silver .40 caliber pistol locked in a safe, while Greg stored his loaded .45 caliber black handgun under his bedside table. Their life, though, wasn't typical. Greg and Michelle had met in an online BDSM community, and their adult-themed house parties drew unwanted attention. After multiple complaints from neighbors, the couple quietly decided to move, looking to buy a lavish new $4.5 million home. On the night of October 12, 2011, the couple stayed up late, talking emotionally about the big move. Michelle ended up falling asleep next to their young daughter, while Greg stayed alone in their bedroom. At 4:40 a.m. on October 13th, a frantic 911 call came in. A woman was screaming. She and her husband had been attacked by an intruder. She claimed she was hurt, and her husband had been shot. Police rushed to the scene and found an unsettling scene. The TV was blasting, a baby was asleep on the couch, and Michelle's young daughter was completely unharmed. But what struck officers immediately was Michelle's demeanor. She was oddly calm, fully dressed, her hair done, and wearing fresh makeup hardly. The image of a woman who'd just survived a brutal home invasion. The entire neighborhood was soon swarming with officers and forensic teams. The nearly 5,000 square foot house was sealed off and searched thoroughly. Michelle told police that a man dressed in black had entered the house, struck her on the head with a wrench, and shot Greg before fleeing out the back door. But her story began to unravel almost immediately. Greg had been shot in the head while lying in bed. His gun, the .45 caliber, was found near the back door, alongside a wrench, but neither had any fingerprints. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing in the home had been stolen. Even the $220,000 in cash the couple kept was untouched. CCTV footage from a neighbor's security camera showed only one vehicle entering the gated community, that night a newspaper delivery car. There was no trace of the so-called intruder, Michelle described. Trying to cover her tracks, Michelle staged the scene. She hit herself with a wrench and wiped down the house with bleach to remove evidence. She would later admit to police that she cleaned Greg's hands and the gun in an effort to make it look like suicide, but something didn't sit right. Despite her story that Greg had taken his own life, Michelle couldn't explain why a man with no known depression, no warning signs, and with a daughter he adored would suddenly choose to end it all. Michelle told police she was simply trying to protect her daughter from the devastating truth of her father's suicide. But it quickly became clear that wasn't the full story. On the night of Greg's death, Michelle visited her sister Laura and never mentioned Greg once. The next morning, she woke up cheerful, dressed immaculately, and went out for breakfast as if nothing had happened. Then the financial motive started to surface. Michelle claimed she didn't care about money, but her actions screamed otherwise. She began cashing checks from Greg's business accounts and sold off assets, including their frozen yogurt shop. She even tried to collect Greg's $600,000 life insurance policy. But there was a problem. The policy had been taken out just 2 months earlier, and under its terms, suicide wasn't covered. The payout was denied. That denial became the turning point in the investigation. Digging deeper, investigators found forged documents tied to the couple's upcoming home purchase. Account numbers had been altered to secure a mortgage loan through fraudulent means. Michelle even canceled a scheduled meeting with the mortgage lender after Greg's death. Another red flag. But her most damning mistake was thinking she was untouchable. She wrote a $188,000 check to an attorney and went on a vacation to Grapevine with her children. While investigators were still combing through evidence, an autopsy would ultimately seal her fate. Greg had a high dose of sleeping pills in his system, proving he had been drugged. He was shot from a distance of 12 to 18 inches while he slept, with the television volume deliberately raised to muffle the sound. Michelle's daughter, just feet away, had slept through it all. There had never been a break-in. There was no intruder. Michelle Williams had coldly sedated her husband, executed him, and tried to stage it as either a burglary or a suicidal to collect money and continue a life built on lies. On November 3, 2011, the Tarrant County Medical Examiner ruled Greg's death a homicide. Keishla Rodriguez was bright, warm, and full of life. She excelled in school, loved animals, and had dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Her sister Bareilles was her closest confidant, their bond unshakable. Keishla's childhood was filled with hope and ambition, but also the quiet ache of a complicated love. She met Felix Verdejo, a rising boxing star, in school. Their teenage romance simmered beneath the surface for years, lingering even as their lives took different paths. When Keishla's parents divorced in 2011, her mother moved to Florida, but she and her sister stayed behind in San Juan. Verdejo's star, meanwhile, was rising fast by 18. Felix had already competed in the Olympics. He began dating Alyssa Maria Santiago Sierra, an aspiring model, while still secretly seeing Keishla. Alyssa believed she was the love of his life, the woman he'd marry and build a future with. But behind closed doors, Verdejo never let go of Keishla. Her family disapproved of the relationship, sensing the danger in its tangled, manipulative nature. Despite marrying Alyssa in 2016, Verdejo's double life continued. Publicly, he was a doting husband, and, soon after, a proud father. In September 2019, he posted a photo of Alyssa during pregnancy, writing, "Soon I will meet my daddy's princess." Their daughter, Miranda, was born a month later. They seemed like the perfect family. But behind the scenes, the affair with Kishla never truly ended, even when Alyssa caught him exchanging messages with Kishla and other women. Even when she threatened divorce and refused to let him see his daughter, Felix kept coming back. Kishla tried to leave. She wanted to move on, but Felix refused to let her go. He watched her every move and threatened any man who came near her. Kishla, now 27, remained in San Juan, working at a veterinary clinic. Her colleagues described her as dependable and loving, especially toward her pets, 2 dogs and a cat. Her life seemed to be finding calm, but then, in April 2021, everything changed. Kishla found out she was pregnant. A home test confirmed it. She called her sister first, then, a few days later, she told Felix she hoped, maybe foolishly, that he'd be happy, or at least willing, to co-parent. But his response was rage. He demanded she get an abortion, terrified that a child born out of wedlock would destroy his reputation. When Kishla refused, he began threatening her. Eventually, he called and claimed he wanted to see proof of the pregnancy himself. He suggested they meet in public, as they usually did, to avoid attention. Kishla agreed, perhaps still believing there was a chance he'd do the right thing. Before the meeting, Felix paid a visit to an old friend, Luis Antonio Cadiz Martinez, a man with connections to the criminal underworld. Felix laid out a plan to get rid of Kishla. At first, Luis was hesitant, but the promise of money and Felix's persuasion won him over. On the evening of April 29, 2021, Kishla arrived at the designated meeting spot in her Kia Forte. Felix drove up in his pickup truck with Luis hiding in the back. Kishla got into the truck and showed Felix her medical documents. They argued. When she refused again to terminate the pregnancy, Felix suddenly punched her, knocking her unconscious. Then, while she lay limp, Felix injected her with a high dose of veterinary sedatives Luis had supplied. The 2 men moved her to the bed of the pickup, tied her body to a concrete block with wire, and covered her with a tarp. They drove silently to the Teodoro Moscoso Bridge, which stretched over the San Jose Lagoon. Under cover of darkness, they dumped Kishla into the water, but unconscious. As if that weren't enough, they fired several rounds into the lagoon to ensure she wouldn't survive. By morning, Kishla's absence was noticed. She hadn't shown up at the veterinary clinic at first for the responsible, punctual woman. She wasn't answering calls. Her co-workers were the first to raise alarms. The nightmare had begun. Part 2. The disappearance of Kishla Rodriguez Juan. Kishla Rodriguez stopped answering her phone. Her sister Berenice grew worried. After multiple failed attempts to reach her, Berenice decided to go to her home. She had a spare key just in case, but when she entered the house, it was eerily silent. The only sounds came from Kishla's hungry pets, who hadn't been fed in nearly 24 hours. Panic set in. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Berenice immediately called their mother, who was living in Florida, and reported her suspicions to the police. She also contacted Felix Verdejo directly, but Felix claimed he'd been home all night with his wife and daughter, and had no idea where Kishla was. Kishla's mother took the first flight to San Juan, desperately hoping her daughter was safe. She wondered if Felix, afraid of the scandal, had paid for a secret abortion. The idea that her daughter might already be dead was too painful to consider. The police began their investigation by speaking with neighbors and colleagues. No one had seen or heard anything unusual. Simultaneously, Kishla's family began spreading the word across social media, pleading for information. The case quickly caught the attention of the press, especially after it was revealed that Kishla had been in a long-term affair with the married Olympic boxer Felix Verdejo and was pregnant with his child. Then, on April 30th, Kishla's car was found abandoned on the east side of the city. Her belongings were still inside ID purse and phone, but there were no signs of a struggle. It was a grim discovery, yet one that sparked a flicker of hope. Maybe she was still alive. That hope was extinguished the very next day, on May 1st. A passerby walking across the Teodoro Moscoso Bridge spotted what looked like a body floating in the San Jose Lagoon. Police arrived quickly. The corpse, badly decomposed from days in the water, was soon identified by a distinctive tattoo on the arm. It was Kishla Rodriguez. San Juan erupted in grief and outrage. The discovery sent shockwaves across Puerto Rico. Crowds gathered in spontaneous protest, demanding justice not only for Kishla, but for all women lost to gender violence. The media dubbed it a national tragedy. That same day, Verdejo was brought in for questioning. He denied everything, stating again that he had been home all night. But then, in a stunning turn, his own wife contradicted his alibi. She admitted that not only did she know about his affair with Kishla, but he hadn't been home the night she disappeared. Surveillance footage was soon uncovered, showing Felix's truck and Kishla's car traveling toward the bridge, one behind the other. But it was clear Kishla wasn't driving. The police seized Felix's truck and found strands of Kishla's hair in the bed of the vehicle. The dam finally broke when Felix's accomplice, Luis Antonio Cadiz Martinez, turned himself in exchange for a reduced sentence. He told investigators everything. Kishla's funeral on May 8th became a national moment of mourning. Her coffin arrived not in a traditional hearse, but in a white horse-drawn carriage. White flower petals rained down from above. Politicians, celebrities, athletes all joined in paying tribute to a life stolen far too soon. Part 3. Justice for Kishla Felix Verdejo was charged with carjacking, kidnapping resulting in death, premeditated murder, and murder of an unborn child, federal crimes carrying the possibility of the death penalty. But Kishla's family urged the court not to pursue execution. They wanted Felix to live to suffer, imprisoned for the rest of his life. The trial faced delays due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but proceedings resumed virtually in 2021. Prosecutors laid out a brutal, calculated murder committed with particular cruelty against a pregnant woman. Thanks to Luz's detailed confession, investigators were able to reconstruct the entire crime. Felix had planned it in advance. He obtained drugs and materials for body disposal. He lured Kishla to a secluded meeting. He assaulted her, sedated her, bound her to a concrete block, and still alive, threw her into the lagoon. Then, he fired several gunshots into the water to ensure she wouldn't survive. While Luis admitted his role and expressed remorse, Felix remained stone-faced, denying all involvement. But his lies couldn't hold up in court. Even his wife Alyssa, who testified against him, filed for divorce shortly after his arrest. She tried to distance herself entirely from the crime. Rumors swirled that she had also received anonymous threats and was briefly suspected of involvement. But there was no evidence linking her to the plot. In summer 2023, the jury returned its verdict, guilty on all charges for both Felix Verdejo and Luis Cadiz, though sentencing was still pending as of late 2023. Both men faced life in prison without the possibility of parole. Epilogue: A nation in mourning Kishla's death sparked a reckoning in Puerto Rico. The tragedy put a harsh spotlight on domestic abuse, coercion, and femicide. Her family's fight for justice became a rallying cry across the island. They chose not to demand death, but lifelong accountability. Felix Verdejo was once hailed as a national treasure, a boxer destined for greatness. Instead, his legacy is one of violence, cowardice, and betrayal. He threw away his future and destroyed the lives of 2 innocent people in the process. As of now, Felix Verdejo remains in federal custody, awaiting formal sentencing. Luis Cadiz, his accomplice, is expected to serve life as well, but the name the world remembers is Kishla Rodriguez, a kind, bright, and loving young woman whose voice was silenced far too soon, but whose story will never be forgotten. Part 4. The vanishing of Sidney Lufite started with a black garbage bag on the side of a quiet Nebraska highway. A passing motorist had stopped to change a flat tire. In the beam of his flashlight, something caught his Aja-torn trash bag with an ominous shape. As he got closer, the shape became clearer. A human hand was protruding from the shredded plastic. Police were called immediately. The area was cordoned off and meticulously searched. Forensic teams quickly confirmed what everyone feared. The bag contained human remains. It was a disturbing scene, one that marked the beginning of a horrific case that would shake Nebraska to its core. Those remains were soon identified as belonging to 24-year-old Sidney Irene Loof. Chapter 1. A bright light in the heartland. Sidney Loof was born on August 21st, 1993, in Broken Bow, Nebraska, and grew up in Arcadia, a small town where everyone knew everyone. Her parents, George and Susie Loof, were respected members of the community. George was the school principal, and Susie taught special education. Sidney had a joyful childhood, one filled with nature walks, fishing trips with her father, and school sports. She played basketball and golf until a scoliosis diagnosis forced her to give up her athletic dreams. Despite this setback, Sidney remained vibrant and optimistic, known for her warm smile and adventurous spirit. In 2011, after graduating from high school, Sidney took a job at Menards, a home improvement store. She later moved from Nellie to Lincoln for work, but remained tightly connected to her family. They spoke frequently and often shared dinners, even with Sidney living on her own. But by late 2017, Sidney was struggling. Her mental health was deteriorating. She told her mother that her medications didn't seem to be working and that she felt overwhelmed by uncertainty about her future. Sidney wasn't sure what she wanted to do with her life, and her job at the store, while stable, left her unfulfilled, concerned. Susie recommended a new doctor, and Sidney began a different treatment plan. Their phone calls grew more hopeful. Sidney sounded lighter, more energetic. She even began exploring the idea of dating again. Chapter 2. A Tinder match turns deadly. Sidney, like many young people, used Tinder to meet new people. She was openly interested in women and longed not just for companionship, but for connection. In November 2017, she matched with a woman named Audrey, and they quickly hit it off. They shared interests in hiking, gambling, and good food. Within hours of chatting, they agreed to meet. Their first meeting took place at Audrey's house in Wilbur, Nebraska, on November 14th. It went so well that Sidney was glowing with excitement. She texted friends and family, saying how happy she was. The very next day, November 15th, 2017, Sidney returned to work, completed her shift, went home, freshened up, and did her makeup. She posted a selfie to Snapchat and Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." Audrey had messaged her to meet outside, waiting in the car. That would be the last time anyone saw Sidney Lufay alive. Chapter 3. The disappearance. When Sidney failed to show up for work the next day, her co-workers were immediately concerned. Sidney was always punctual, always responsible. Her family was notified, and they grew increasingly alarmed. Just days earlier, Sidney had talked with them about her anxiety, depression, and hopes for the future. They knew she wouldn't disappear without reason. Her parents went to her apartment and were met by an unsettling sight. Sidney's beloved cat, Missy, was alone, hungry, and without water. Sidney would never leave her pet like that. The apartment was locked. Nothing inside appeared disturbed. But something was very wrong. Her family reported her missing. The police conducted a welfare check. Though the home appeared orderly, Sydney's sudden silence and the cat's condition convinced them this was no simple disappearance. The case was taken seriously from the beginning. Part 5. The Tinder Trap. The murder of Sydney Lufite was November 16, 2017, when Sydney Luf, a 24-year-old store clerk from Lincoln, Nebraska, was officially reported missing. She hadn't shown up to her job at the Menards Home Improvement Store on 27th Street and Cornhusker Highway. Her absence was instantly alarming. Sydney wasn't the kind of person to skip work, especially not without warning. Sydney stood out in a crowd, at 5 feet 7 inches, with blonde hair and a distinctive gait due to scoliosis. She was easily recognizable. On the day she vanished, she was last seen wearing a white Columbia jacket and a cream-colored shirt in the days prior. Sydney had been messaging her friends through. She mentioned going on a date with a woman she had met online via Tinder on Tuesday night, and she planned to see her again the following evening. That second meeting would be her last. Chapter 1. The vanishing act. Sydney's car was found abandoned in northeast Lincoln. Her bank account showed no activity. Her phone had been powered off the night she disappeared. After briefly connecting to a cell tower located 40 miles southwest of Lincoln, near the small town of Wilbur, Sydney's parents and friends feared the worst. They flooded the streets with flyers. Her family posted emotional appeals across social media. Billboards displaying Sydney's face and the word missing went up along highways across Nebraska. Her mother, Susie Loof, was convinced something sinister had happened. She had proof. A screenshot of Sydney's Snapchat post from the night of her disappearance. In the photo, Sydney had captioned her selfie with 4 chilling words: "Ready for my date." Chapter 2. Audrey and a fake name. Detectives quickly began analyzing Sydney's digital trail. Phone records and surveillance footage revealed that her phone had last pinged near Wilbur. But who was this mysterious Audrey from Tinder? No one knew her real identity. Sydney's friend, Brooklyn, took it upon herself to help the investigation. She re-downloaded Tinder, found Audrey's profile, matched with her, and exchanged phone numbers. That was the break police needed. Audrey was actually Bailey Boswell, a 26-year-old woman who lived in Wilbur, just a short distance from where Sydney's phone had last been active. Bailey wasn't alone. She lived with her much older boyfriend, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. Chapter 3. Bailey and Aubrey, a dark bonzo, who were Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail. Bailey had grown up in Leon, Iowa, in what by most accounts was a stable and supportive family. She had been athletic and popular in school, but after the death of her father, things changed. She fell into a life of drugs, risky relationships, and ultimately landed on dating sites looking for sugar daddies. That's where she met Aubrey Trail. Aubrey was a convicted felon with a rap sheet filled with fraud, forgery, and theft. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. He referred to himself as a vampire daddy and claimed to run a sex cult. He offered women $200 a week to obey his rules, live under his control, and become part of what he described as a twisted, spiritual family. Some women bought into it by 2017. Aubrey and Bailey were already wanted in connection with a massive fraud scheme and owed over $400,000 in court-ordered restitution. They were no strangers to the law, but what came next was far beyond financial crime. Chapter 4. On the Run-In. November 19, 2017. Police obtained a warrant to search Bailey and Aubrey's Wilbur apartment. What they found raised red flags immediately. Neighbors had reported the overpowering smell of bleach days before the search. Inside the apartment, several walls appeared to have been scrubbed clean. Investigators believed a violent event had occurred and had been covered up. As suspicion grew, the couple fled the state. While on the run, they posted bizarre videos to Facebook. In one, Bailey tearfully claimed innocence, saying, I just want Sydney's family to know that I'm really sorry, but I had nothing to do with it. I hope Sydney is found very soon. She's a lovely, amazing girl, but Sydney would never be found alive. Chapter 5. A gruesome discovery. Police trekked the couple to a Branson, Missouri motel and took them into custody without incident. With Bailey and Aubrey detained, investigators turned to digital evidence. Phone records, GPS data, and surveillance footage began to tell a horrifying story in Clay County. Investigators found Sydney's dismembered body spread across multiple rural ditches in black plastic garbage bags. Her body had been cut into 14 pieces only. 13 were ever recovered. Some internal organs, including her heart, were missing. In total, police identified 16 separate crime scenes. Among the scattered remains were her car keys, driver's license, and phone case, all discarded along highways that matched the route traveled by Bailey and Aubrey. An autopsy revealed signs of brutal violence, contusions on her back, a head injury, torn earlobes, and abrasions on her wrists. The cruelty was undeniable. Part 6. The Vampire Daddy and the horror behind the disappearance of Sydney Lufethi. Discovery of Sydney. Luf's dismembered body sent shockwaves across Nebraska and beyond. There were wounds on her body, clear signs that she had fought back with everything she had. The tragedy broke not only the hearts of her family and friends, but gripped an entire state with grief and disbelief. On December 11, 2017, the Luf family held a private funeral at the Lutheran church Sydney had attended during her life. What should have been a quiet memorial was shadowed by the gruesome reality of what had happened. Shortly after, Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail were formally charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit a felony, and improper disposal of human remains. Bailey pled not guilty to all charges. Aubrey, while also denying the murder and conspiracy, did admit to disposing of Sydney's body, but nothing about his statements could be trusted. His version of events shifted with every conversation. Chapter 1. The fantasist. In one of his earliest interviews with police, Aubrey Trail described a bizarre world of witchcraft, cults, and vampirism. He claimed to be a vampire who could fly, and insisted he led a coven of witches. According to this version, the witches had to kill a woman to gain supernatural power. Eventually, in court, Trail claimed he alone killed Sydney, but it had been an accident. He told the judge he paid Sydney $5,000 to take part in an intimate fantasy involving him and 2 other women. He said the death occurred accidentally during this encounter, when she was strangled with a cord. He went on to justify dismembering her body as part of a sacred ritual, claiming he had to drain her blood to free her soul and scatter her remains to help her reincarnate. It was a grotesque and theatrical explanation, but one that fell apart quickly. Surveillance footage dated November 14th showed Bailey and Aubrey checking into a hotel in Lincoln, not far from where Sydney lived. The next day, November 15th, they were caught on camera at a hardware store buying a collection of items that would later be used to dispose of Sydney's body: bleach, saws, knives, and garbage bags. That same afternoon, at exactly 12:01 p.m., security footage captured Sydney at the Menards store, unknowingly crossing paths with Aubrey Trail, the man who would end her life that very night. Chapter TWO. The trials begin. By June 11, 2018, the first court proceedings began. Due to the publicity, the trials were moved from Wilbur to Lexington to ensure an unbiased jury, though they would be tried separately. The charges were nearly identical. Prosecutors argued that Sydney's murder was not only premeditated, but also part of a deliberate pattern. Trail and Boswell, they claimed, had a history of luring young women through Tinder, manipulating them into disturbing and controlling relationships. 3 women came forward to testify. Each had been recruited by Bailey via dating apps, and later introduced to Aubrey. They all shared eerily similar stories: receiving a weekly stipend, being told they were joining a cult and being pushed into violent fantasies. One woman even recalled Bailey fantasizing about breaking fingers and dismemberment. Chapter 3. What really happened according to prosecutors? On the evening of November 15, 2017, Sydney Loof left her apartment, excited for a second date with Bailey. She had no idea what awaited her. Bailey picked her up and took her to the apartment she shared with Aubrey and Wilbur. The moment Sydney stepped inside, she was ambushed. The prosecution laid out that Sydney was strangled with an extension cord on the living room floor. After the murder, Bailey and Aubrey cleaned the apartment with bleach, detail confirmed by their landlord, Jennifer Call, who testified that the house smelled overwhelmingly of chlorine the next day. The dismemberment was methodical and horrific. Sydney's body was cut into 14 parts, 13 of which were later recovered. Notably, her upper left arm and several internal organs were never found. The coroner ruled the cause of death as asphyxiation, and her body bore signs of bruises and trauma. Chapter 4. A courtroom stunt. The trial became even more disturbing when, during court proceedings, Aubrey Trail stood up and screamed, "Bailey is innocent. Damn you all." Then, in front of the courtroom, he slashed his own throat 3 times with a concealed razor blade. He survived the attempt, but the self-inflicted injuries forced him out of the courtroom for weeks. When he returned, visibly scarred, he testified, once again offering yet another version of events. He now claimed Sydney first met him in March 2017, and they had engaged in illegal activities together. They reconnected in November, allegedly because Sydney needed money. Aubrey said he offered her $5,000 to take part in what he now called an antique theft operation. He maintained that her death was an accident during an intimate act, gone wrong. He denied any involvement in the occult and said he panicked when she stopped breathing. "I don't know if Sydney had a seizure or something, but she stopped breathing," he told the court. "There was no ritual. I just couldn't put her body in the car, so I cut her up and dumped her." Chapter 5. Bailey's defense. While Aubrey admitted to disposing of Sydney's body, Bailey Boswell denied any involvement entirely. Her defense painted her as a victim herself, manipulated and abused by Aubrey Trail. Her attorneys said that, when she met him, she was a lonely and vulnerable waitress in Missouri. They argued that Bailey had nothing to do with the murder or the disposal of Sydney's body. But cell phone data told a different story. The phone Bailey used to access her Tinder account was tracked near the same sites where Sydney's body parts and personal belongings were discarded. GPS and tower pings placed her exactly along the same route. Aubrey took after the murder. Part 7. The verdict. Justice for Sydney. Loofite was through meticulous digital forensics, analyzing phone records, GPS data, and movement logs that investigators were finally able to locate the dismembered remains of Sydney Loof, one by one. Her body parts were recovered from ditches in rural areas in Clay County, Nebraska. But the most haunting revelation came not just from what was found, but from how and why it happened. In court, the prosecution laid out a chilling sequence of events, exposing Bailey Boswell's central role in orchestrating the encounter that led to Sydney's death. It was Bailey who reached out to Sydney on Tinder. It was Bailey who arranged the second date. And it was Bailey who drove to Sydney's duplex on the night of November 15th, 2017, to pick her up under the pretense of romance. According to prosecutors, Bailey derived a disturbing pleasure from discussing cruelty and torture. Witnesses and digital evidence showed she often engaged in graphic conversations with Aubrey Trail about violent fantasies. The two seemed to feed off each other's darkest urges. A carefully orchestrated crime the very day Sydney was murdered. Bailey and Aubrey were captured on surveillance footage, shopping at a Home Depot, purchasing items that would later become evidence: a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter. These tools would be used not just to dispose of Sydney's body, but to desecrate it. That same afternoon, Bailey sent Sydney a text asking how her day was going. Phone data revealed that she was sitting in the Menards parking lot with Aubrey when she sent the message just outside the very store where Sydney worked. But Sydney had no idea they were watching her. Later that day, Bailey messaged Sydney again, telling her she was on her way. But instead of a date, Sydney was being lured to her death. The location data showed the two never went anywhere public. Sydney was taken straight to the Wilbur apartment, where Aubrey Trail lay in wait. The trial and defense at trial. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, tried to draw a line between involvement and responsibility. He argued that while Bailey was indeed guilty of purchasing bleach, garbage bags, and helping dispose of the body, the prosecution had failed to prove that she actively participated in Sydney's murder. At most, he claimed, Bailey could be convicted of aiding and abetting the improper disposal of human remains. But the jury didn't agree. The premeditation was undeniable. The messages, the purchases, the pattern of luring women through Tinder, the mutilation of Sydney's body, the carefully orchestrated disposal. Justice delivered on July 11, 2019. A jury took less than 3 hours to find Aubrey Trail guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy, and improper disposal of human remains. The panel of judges described the murder as cold, calculated, and premeditated. The court then entered a second phase of the trial to determine whether Aubrey should receive the death penalty. Prosecutors held true to their word and made their case with brutal clarity. On June 9, 2021, the panel handed down its decision. Aubrey Trail was sentenced to death by lethal injection, a family's long wait. Meanwhile, the Loof family, who had waited and grieved for 3 long years, finally received a measure of peace. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The woman who had lured Sydney Loof into a deadly trap would never walk free again. For George and Susie Loof, and for Sydney's friends and community, the sentence was not a victory, but it was a resolution, a sense that, after so much cruelty, the truth had been told, and those responsible would face justice. Closing reflection: the murder of Sydney Loof was not only a heinous crime, it was a terrifying exploitation of trust, of vulnerability, and of the digital age. Sydney was a kind, bright young woman, searching for connection. Instead, she fell into the hands of predators, hiding behind fake names, Tinder profiles, and delusions of power. Her story reminds us of the very real dangers that exist beneath curated photos and charming messages. But it also reminds us of resilience, the relentless fight for answers by a family who never gave up, and a legal system that, in the end, held evil accountable. Justice was slow, but justice, in the end, was served.